Good evening from our State House studio in Montgomery. I'm Don Daly. In state government headlines tonight, some Alabama counties started issuing same-sex marriage licenses again today after the landmark U.S. Supreme Court ruling that legalized gay unions across the country. The decision had gay rights advocates celebrating and opponents calling it a sad day in the nation's history. Paul Hart of Montgomery filed the first lawsuit that challenged Alabama's ban on same-sex marriages. He called today's high court ruling monumental.
Never thought we'd see this in our lifetime. So this is a good day. This is a wonderful day for members of the community and for just civil liberties and rights that should have been any number of people's for so long.
Hart filed a lawsuit over death benefits for his late husband, David Fancher, who died in a car wreck shortly after their marriage in Massachusetts 4 years ago. He's been represented by attorneys with the Southern Poverty Law Center's LGBT Rights Project. Chinyere Azie is a staff attorney with the initiative.
Whenever we denigrate, members of our society, we denigrate our society at large. We're all in this together, and I think that our collective liberty is really what's at stake.
Paul Hart and Chinyere Azie will join us on the program shortly to talk more about today's Supreme Court decision. Governor Robert Bentley and Alabama Attorney General Luther Strange were among the state officials who expressed dismay today over the gay marriage ruling. Bentley said in a statement that he was disappointed that the justices disregarded the overwhelming vote of the Alabama people in passing a ban on same-sex marriages almost 10 years ago. The Attorney General said in a statement that the Supreme Court overturned centuries of tradition and that his focus would now turn to fighting for religious liberties for the state's citizens. Alabama Chief Justice Roy Moore has probably been the biggest crusader against the implementation of gay marriage in the state. In an interview with Capital Journal today, he said he was surprised and very disappointed with the High Court's ruling, and that even though some state probate judges had already started issuing same-sex marriage licenses again, the matter wasn't completely settled just yet.
Well, of course, that Supreme Court opinion doesn't even take effect till the time for rehearing has occurred, just like in our court, and that's 25 days. So until that time, the injunction issued by the Supreme Court of Alabama remains in full force and effect, and they will have to entertain that injunction and decide what to do with that in face of the Supreme Court ruling. And I'm sure the Supreme Court's going to act on that. I will not sit on that case because of my comments and because of my orders.
The Chief Justice will join us a little later in the broadcast to talk more about today's events. The Supreme Court this week also upheld a key provision of President Obama's Affordable Care Act. It ruled that federal subsidies used to help offset the cost of providing health insurance can continue in states that didn't set up their own insurance exchanges. Alabama was one of those states, and the ruling means that some 130,000 state residents can keep their subsidies. Burnell Mapp is CEO of Health Services Incorporated in Montgomery, one of the state navigators under the ACA.
And when things go to the Supreme Court, you just don't know. It becomes the law of the land once the Supreme Court rules. And to see the Supreme Court and the majority vote come out in favor of these tax credits and sustain Obamacare in the way that it should be sustained, I think it's a great victory for the country. I think it's a great victory for those who need the coverage. I think it's a great victory for everybody that is interested in the well-being of our citizens.
Even though the nation's high court upheld the subsidy provision of the Affordable Care Act this week, supporters concede that other challenges lie ahead and that the battle to keep the law in effect will continue. Alabama Attorney General Luther Strange said today that he is appealing this week's circuit court ruling that would clear the way for the Victoryland Casino in Macon County to reopen. The judge cited the Equal Protection Clause in his ruling and pointed to similar Indian gaming facilities that continue to operate. Victoryland attorney Joe Espy told Capital Journal today that he was disappointed in the state's appeal, but very excited that momentum seems to be on his side.
We were elated. We had been waiting for the ruling to come. As you know, we tried the case in September. And the McGregor family, Victoryland, and the people of East Alabama are elated that finally we've got a decision that makes it clear that they have been mistreated and gives us an opportunity to reopen and put hopefully 2,500 people back to work.
The court ruling also stipulated some 1,600 gaming machines and $263,000 seized in a raid on Victoryland a couple of years ago would have to be returned. Governor Robert Bentley this week ordered all Confederate flags removed from the Capitol grounds. His move came in response to the murders of 9 people at a historic African-American church in Charleston, South Carolina. The suspect in those killings has been pictured posing with the flag, and that prompted a new outcry across the country. Governor Bentley on Wednesday quietly and unceremoniously had the flags removed from the Capitol grounds.
It has become a distraction all over the country right now. Off and on, it's always been a distraction. The Confederate flag was removed from the Capitol Dome around 1992, 1993. Had I been governor then, I would have done the same thing then.
The move to take the flags down didn't come without its detractors. Several gathered outside the state capitol this week as the banners were being removed, and they called it a sad day for them and supporters of history and heritage.
When you start removing the heritage of Confederate soldiers and our ancestors, I have 40 ancestors that fought, some are buried in mass graves, then eventually we're going to get mad and we're going to push back. You're not going to be allowed to have your history if we can't have ours.
We're not going against those that want to use this flag as their history and heritage. We support them on that. We stand with our fellow brothers and sisters on that. But you have others out there that don't believe that it's just for history and heritage. They use it for their ammunition.
The cause to remove the Confederate flags from the state capitol is one that has been championed for many years by State Representative Alvin Holmes of Montgomery. He led the effort that saw the flag taken down from atop the Capitol dome in the 1990s and was prepared to offer a legislative resolution to remove all others. He says such a measure is now unnecessary, but he believes it would have passed.
There are certain members of the House of Representatives that would have gone berserk when I introduced the resolution. Now, I think the majority of the members, both black and white, would have accepted it, but you got some hard, cold left-wingers up there in the House of Representatives that don't think I ought to be in the legislature and don't think no black ought to be in the legislature, and we would have had trouble with them on that resolution.
Representative Holmes will join us a little later in the program to talk more about this week's removal of the Confederate flag from the Capitol grounds. There are actually 5 Confederate flags, but 2 of them usually get the most attention. In our in-depth report tonight, Capitol Journal's Karen Brown sat down with Eva Newman with the Little White House of the Confederacy to talk about all of the controversy.
It's our responsibility to teach and explain the things that history has taught us.
Those things include the Confederate flags. This week, the 4 flags were removed from the Capitol grounds. Newman explains the meanings of the 2 most prominent. The government flag
that represents the nation of the Confederacy, the stars and bars. On it, it has the 7 original states that seceded.
She likens this flag to the U.S. flag, which represents the 50 states. The second is the military flag.
The battle flag has the 11 states, plus Kentucky and Missouri, who were neutral, and they were added to have 13 stars to represent the 13 original colonies. The battle flag rallied the troops to battle when the war between the states erupted.
Newman notes that revenue from slavery was at the heart of the war, but she condemns the flag's misuse.
When the KK and the skinheads and other groups used that flag for their purpose of terror, cruelty, misunderstanding, and statements such as segregation now, tomorrow, and forever, are we not teaching hate with that flag? The flag doesn't speak. The flag is a piece of history. God created man in his image. Love is respect, and we have to respect all of God's creation.
For Capitol Journal, I'm Karen Brown.
State officials announced this week that Google plans to build a $600 million data center in Stevenson, which is in Jackson County in northeast Alabama. It'll utilize TVA's former Widows Creek power plant facility and will bring with it up to 100 jobs to the area. The project is the first recruited under Alabama's specialized data center incentives passed in 2012, as well as the Alabama Jobs Act. Construction on the Google facility is expected to start in 2016. Meantime, Hyundai said this week that it will begin work on a new automotive assembly plant this year, and reports said Alabama is still in the running to land the facility. South Korea's Yonhap news agency quoted a source close to Hyundai as saying that Alabama is one of the candidate states competing for the SUV production plant. All of this good economic news comes as Alabama's job market continues to improve. It's something state officials are very excited about. Capitol Journal's Randy Scott takes a closer look tonight.
Like the summer heat, attention to Alabama's economy and job market is rising.
We are doing really, really good this year.
Auburn University at Montgomery's professor Dr. Kayvon Darabi says Alabama's economy and job market have improved in 5 years, creating over 33,000 new jobs in the first half of 2015. But
our problem is that we have lost so many jobs and the recovery has been so slow that we have a long way to go. That means that we need many months of 33,000 on average jobs growth.
A challenge Fitzgerald Washington is glad to accept.
It's encouraging for the economy. I think the employers understand that we're on a pretty nice trajectory with the economy, and so with that, they're hiring more people.
Washington is the commissioner of Alabama's Department of Labor. His agency works to keep Alabamians working by helping find new jobs.
We're at 34,800 jobs in just 5 months in 2015. So that's exciting news for everybody.
Washington says the process includes educating citizens of job opportunities available to them.
We're going out and taking our resources to, say, counties that have high unemployment, to take our service to them, because we as an agency just can't sit back and assume that, number one, that job seekers know about these resources that we have to offer. We also want to make sure that they have access to our resources.
For Capitol Journal, I'm Randy Scott.
Stay in touch with Capitol Journal online, on Facebook, and on Twitter. You can also contact us by email at ddaily@aptv.org or by mail.
Next up on the broadcast, today's U.S. Supreme Court decision which legalized same-sex marriage in all 50 states is our topic. Two special guests join us in studio today. Paul Hard is a Montgomery resident who filed the first lawsuit that challenged our marriage laws in the state of Alabama. Paul, welcome to Capitol Journal.
Thank you for having me.
Also with us today is Chinyere Azie, who is a staff attorney with the LGBT Rights Project with the Southern Poverty Law Center. Chinyere, welcome to Capitol Journal.
Thank you.
Paul, I'll begin with you. This must be an emotional day for you.
Oh, incredibly. I was glued to my iPad. I was actually administering a test at the university where I work, and was watching the news feed as the results were coming in from the Supreme Court. I had to excuse myself from the room for just a moment and go down the hall and kind of give a rebel yell in the stairwell of the university. And actually teared up. Actually, my student was getting up leaving. She said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I'm fine. We just had great news here today."
Indeed.
And the scene downtown, a group of us came down to celebrate in front of the probate court, and we're so excited. It was just a wonderful scene.
Paul, I'm going to remind folks of your story. You married your late husband, David Fancher, in Massachusetts, and what year was that?
That was May the 20th of 2011.
So I know this must be a bittersweet day that he did not live to see this day with you.
Yes, it is. We were married for about a month and a half before his fatal automobile accident. And he, I imagine, would be very, very pleased to see this day. And I had friends that were texting me earlier and saying they imagine that he's in heaven celebrating with us today.
Marriage equality is what this has been all about for you and those who have supported same-sex marriage for a number of years. Of course, same-sex marriage has its detractors, but when you speak to them about what this day means to you, what do you tell them?
Very often I start with any of the indignities, any of the injustices that I suffered after David died. none of them would impose upon me. None of them would want me any harm. It's entirely possible for them to adhere to their definition and understanding of marriage and at the same time be willing to issue me civil rights and grant me civil liberties that are guaranteed to any couple. If Britney Spears got married for 5 minutes in a Las Vegas wedding by Elvis, she would have every legal right and every legal protection that our laws afford, even if that was a sham of a marriage. And I've known same-sex couples that have been together for 30 years that have, up until this point, had no legal protections at all.
Paul, a lot of people thought the U.S. Supreme Court might wait until Monday to issue its ruling, but surprise, they issued it today, Friday, and there is significance, is there not, in issuing it when they did, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yesterday, by interesting coincidence, the pride flag was first flown in San Francisco a few years back. But today's date is the anniversary of Lawrence versus Texas and also the repeal of DOMA back just a few years ago.
DOMA, of course, being the Defensive Marriage Act.
Absolutely.
So today is significant on many, many levels.
Absolutely. Really big.
Janieri, I want to hear a little bit about the LGBT Rights Project at the Southern Poverty Law Center. Tell us what that's all about.
We are a subgroup of the Southern Poverty Law Center that's dedicated to advancing the rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender individuals who are living in the Southeast, as well as other parts of the country.
A day to celebrate for your organization today?
It certainly is. We view the Supreme Court's decision today as reaffirming that members of the LGBT community live lives that are valuable and that are entitled to dignity, under the law.
Were you surprised with the ruling?
I will say that for many of us, this was a day that was long awaited, but we were hoping that this would be the result. We think that the Constitution does afford, protections to members of this community, and so we're glad the Supreme Court agreed.
Now, I mentioned at the outset, Janieri, that Paul filed the first lawsuit in the state of Alabama which challenged our marriage laws, and the Southern Poverty Law Center has helped represent him in this case. And while he can't talk specifics, I know you can talk about generalities of the case. It essentially deals with his late husband's death. And after his death, because Alabama didn't recognize their marriage, he could not receive death benefits from his late husband.
That's correct. Paul was unable to be recognized as a surviving spouse. He was denied that right in the middle of his grief. And so our lawsuit was filed to, as a preliminary matter, get him recognition on the death certificate that his husband was issued, to be recognized as the widower, and, and now to collect some surviving death benefits that were being denied up until now.
That's kind of illustrative, don't you think, of this issue in a bigger picture, because those rights that same-sex couples enjoy and might take for granted really come to bear when you look at same-sex couples who did not have all of those rights.
That's absolutely correct. Members of our community up till now have had trouble, going to visit their partners in the hospital if they're in an accident. That was something that Paul experienced that was very painful, not being allowed to be by his husband's side, on his deathbed. It's also something that inhibits people from being able to have recognition with respect to their parenting relationships. So it might be the case that, there's a two-parent household and only one of the parents is recognized as the mother or the father of a child. And so every day, members of our community have had to navigate really a web of laws, that just deny them recognition. And there was one comment that came across my Facebook feed from someone who's in the community who for years has been carrying a USB drive in her wallet that just indicates, for instance, that she has had a second parent adoption, that she is married, in a given state to her partner, and just has always been living in fear that she'll enter the, cross the state line and enter the wrong place, and all those rights disappear.
Mm-hmm. Paul, when you married David in 2011, you came back to Alabama to live where your marriage was not recognized. Was that a challenging decision to make?
We considered living other places that were more accepting, at least as in terms of the political and legal climate. But Alabama's home. It's home to both of us, and it's where our families are and have been. We were both natives of Alabama. We love the people here. We love the state. You know, people very often, you know, teasingly around the country when I would meet them and they would know me to be the Alabama plaintiff would say, why haven't you moved? You know, why are you living in Alabama? Because Alabama's home. And for all of the detractions, there's a lot of good in our state that is worth staying here for. And so, yeah, it was a thought, but this is home. This is where we wanted to make our home.
Well, at the same time, did you think in 2011 that this day would ever come?
One of my students, when asked about this, you know, is it going to happen, said maybe when I die. And this is one of my students who's in their 20s. And so we wondered. And in fact, standing in front of the courthouse, me and one of the other folks were saying, we never thought we'd see this in our lifetime. So this is a good day. This is a wonderful day for members of the community and for just civil liberties and rights that should have been any number of people's for so long.
I want to go back to something you said at the outset, David. You were talking about you were outside probate court today in Montgomery, celebrating with others after the ruling came out. Could you kind of set the mood for us, what it was like there?
It was. This was the place that if you were hug deficient, this was the place to go. We were. There were a group of us that had said, regardless of how the outcome of the case, we were going to be out in front of the courthouse to celebrate. And if any couples did come to see if they could receive their marriage license, that we'd be there to support them. And so there was a lot of hugging, a lot of handshaking, people driving by from the downtown community that were honking their horns and indicating support of us. So it was a really good day, a very jubilant one.
Chinyere, I can't help but notice your shirt, and for those of our viewers who don't realize what it says y'all means all. Tell us about that philosophy.
I think it's really simple, and it's just that, you know, members of the LGBT community are members of the society at large. You know, we're Alabamians, we come from all over, and we want to participate fully in the communities that we're a part of. And, you know, LGBT rights, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender rights are not, you know, they're everyone's issue. It is about civil rights and civil liberties and just being able to be treated with dignity.
You know, there have been some who have called this an extension of the modern Civil Rights Day movement. And while the tracks are very different, say from the civil rights struggles of African Americans during the 1950s and 60s, there are some parallels. Would you agree?
I would agree. And I think that that's not to say that everyone faces the same sorts of challenges or oppressions, but I think that, you know, today's been a really great day that is rooted in Loving v. Virginia, and that is rooted in so many decisions that have recognized that whenever we denigrate, you know, members of our society, we denigrate our society at large. You know, we're all in this together, and I think that our collective liberty is really what's at stake.
You know, the critics would say that this is a horrible day for our society and our culture at large. Is it easy to answer those critics?
I think so. You know, I think that even in the Bible, you know, you have this idea that God is love and that love prevails. And I don't think that anyone, you know, whether it's Roy Moore down the street or, you know, folks who are coming onto this issue for the first time should view the ability of two people that love each other to sort of profess that love publicly and raise a family and build a foundation, that's a tragedy, you know, for anyone. It's really just an affirmation of what our society is capable of, I think, in terms of recognizing the dignity of man.
Paul, I heard someone say something recently, tell me if you agree with this, that even those who find themselves very much removed from the gay rights movement, the marriage equality movement, they probably know someone is gay, they probably work with someone who's gay, whether they realize it or not, and so this does affect them maybe more than they realize.
It's rather like, I tell students, I teach counseling at Auburn Montgomery, and I tell my students, never tell the universe who you're not going to work with, because the universe has a way of bringing those people to your door. I had a good friend some years ago that didn't know me any better, and he said, I just don't think that I could work with a gay man. And actually, he was bench pressing, and I was holding the weights over his head, and I looked down at him and said, are you sure? And the fact of the matter is that, yes, you know someone, maybe you don't know that you know them, but everybody knows someone or has some connection to the LGBT community. And it's one thing to pull a lever at a voting box and say, I want to stand for traditional marriage. You don't realize sometimes when you do that, that what you're doing is also taking a stand against people, and you're endorsing discrimination and harm to them. Many of the folks that did that would never endorse discrimination or harm. They just thought of themselves as taking a stand for their personal beliefs. I respect that, but do those personal beliefs intrude themselves into the civil and political process? When someone is requesting, when they are wanting to be recognized for their civil rights, does that mean that someone else's religious views should impinge upon that? Mm-hmm. And I think that you can have your religious views and at the same time extend civil rights to other people.
Chinyere, we've heard from people like Governor Robert Bentley today and the Attorney General Luther Strange, among others, who have all pointed to the constitutional amendment that was overwhelmingly approved by Alabama voters back in the early 2000s. Which defined marriage as being between a man and a woman. And the contention is being that that will of the people, that vote, is being trampled on today by the U.S. Supreme Court.
You know, what I think is really significant about the U.S. Constitution is that it protects against what is often phrased as the tyranny of the majority. You know, it's not about sort of the will of the people in a given moment. That's not necessarily what prevails. It's these overriding principles of fairness, principles of anti-discrimination, and those are often viewed as more important than, for instance, what a particular group has to say. And that's exactly how this movement does relate to the civil rights movement as it transpired 50 years ago. You know, it wasn't necessarily popular, you know, when Brown v. Board happened, you know, the idea of anti-segregation, but the point is that the views of the people weren't the deciding vote. It was really just what the Constitution requires.
Yeah. I was thinking while you were talking about that, I was in grade school when the schools were desegregated in my town in West Alabama. And I remember as a kid, all of the adults around me saying, we should be allowed to vote on this. The Supreme Court did not allow a popular vote on people's civil rights back then, and shouldn't allow a vote on people's civil rights now. If it comes to the majority, when would we extend civil rights to people that we disapprove of? It's not going to happen, and that's not the way that our court system works.
Chinyere, State Representative Patricia Todd, who obviously has been a tireless advocate for marriage equality and who has been on this show previously a couple of times, said something very memorable in an interview on this show once. She said that just because the majority voted for something doesn't make it right. If majority always ruled, as she put it during that interview, slavery might still exist, for instance.
I couldn't agree more, and I think that Paul hit it right on the head. You know, we don't put people's civil rights up to a vote. It really is about abiding principles of justice, and again, that's what the Constitution enshrines and what it requires, and I think the Supreme Court absolutely affirmed today that it extends equally to racial minorities and to minorities who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender.
The Southern Poverty Law Center's LGBT Rights Project, your work continues, does it not? Because there's still work to be done here.
There's a lot of work to be done. We have problems today, you know, regarding employment discrimination. You can get married on Sunday and fired on Monday still in Alabama, and so our work definitely isn't done.
There are housing issues, there's second parent adoption issues. There's a lot of things that are going to have to be worked out as a result of today's ruling, right?
That's also correct. There's definitely going to be a lot of work to still do. You know, we haven't necessarily seen an indication yet that all of the probate offices in Alabama are going to begin issuing marriage licenses. So there's a lot of work to do, but I think today we celebrate.
It's a great celebration. And to reflect on what you just said, I've had members of the community that have come to me and literally said, yesterday my landlady stopped by for coffee and she was asking me about finding someone in my life and when am I going to find a nice man, and the lady said, well, I'm looking for a lady, not a man, and she felt like that she was in a supportive environment where she could say that, and not an hour later showed up with an eviction notice. And this is very real. This very much does happen in our state, and so the job's not done. It's just starting. It's just a good starting point.
Finally, Paul, I know that your suit is still pending, but this is a monumental day, would you say?
Absolutely. This is a tremendous day. And I don't know where the courts are going to go with my case. I think this gives me a great deal of hope, but we will see. And I will trust in the justice system to do the right thing.
Paul Hard filed the first lawsuit against Alabama's marriage laws. Paul, thank you for being here and talking with us about this today.
Thank you for having me.
And Chinyere Azie is a staff attorney with the LGBT Rights Project with the Southern Poverty Law Center. It's a pleasure to have you with us today as well.
Thanks so much.
You bet. And Capital Journal. We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the online video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. Alabama Public Television's Ready to Learn service is on the road every week, providing on-site workshops, resources, and books for child care professionals, teachers, and parents across the state. On the go, helping children grow. Alabama Public Television.
Next up on the broadcast, we're in the offices of Alabama Chief Justice Roy Moore as we continue our conversation about today's U.S. Supreme Court ruling on same-sex marriage. Mr. Chief Justice, welcome to the program.
Nice to be with you.
Nice to see you again. Were you surprised at the ruling today?
I was surprised, a little shocked. I thought they'd regard states' rights a little more, and I was very surprised at it. I was dismayed that two of the justices on there had already performed same-sex marriages and refused to recuse, even in the face of a request of recusal under 28 U.S.C. They didn't recuse. They didn't refuse to sit on the case. You know, there's a case before the Alabama Supreme Court.
Right.
And I have not been participating in that, and I will not participate in that case because I have issued orders. And that's part of our judicial canons of ethics when we've made statements that may affect the case or statements on that case. Of course, my order was issued before the case occurred, but I did not take, a vote in that case. I abstained from voting. And I think that Justice Kagan, Justice Ginsburg should have done the same thing, but instead, on a case which basically confronts the basic foundation of this country, which is family, they failed to recuse.
You have vigorously fought this day coming. What happens next here in Alabama? Are we ready to move forward with the law?
Well, of course, that Supreme Court opinion doesn't even take effect till the time for rehearing has occurred, just like in our court, and that's 25 days. So until that time, the injunction issued by the Supreme Court of Alabama remains in full force and effect, and they will have to entertain that injunction and decide what to do with that in face of the Supreme Court ruling. And I'm sure the Supreme Court's going to act on that. I will not sit on that case because of my comments and because of my orders.
Mm-hmm. Well, even if it comes to that and after 25 days, this will be the law of Alabama, correct?
Well, that's up to the Supreme Court of Alabama and up to the interpretation of the opinion before them. You see, Alabama is in a unique situation. We decided the case, or they decided the case, before the United States Supreme Court ruled. So it's a case decided. Whether or not they will retract that case depends upon the Alabama Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm. So help us understand the logistics of this then. It seems sort of an interesting dichotomy given the two courts.
Well, I think it's interesting because our court had made a ruling on the sanctity of marriage amendment to the Alabama Constitution before the United States Supreme Court even ruled. So the injunction for effect remains in effect until the Alabama Supreme Court removes it or does something with it. So it's up to them, and I'm not participating again in that action because of my administrative orders and other things that I've done on same-sex marriage, and because I'm making conversation with the media today on the United States Supreme Court case. But I think it will be decided by the Alabama Supreme Court.
Is the Alabama Supreme Court bound to remove it, given the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling?
Well, again, I can't speak for the Alabama Supreme Court. I can't speak on this case because I'm not sitting on it.
Okay. The controversy that has surrounded this, the confusion when gay marriage was temporarily legalized in Alabama, it has caused quite a ruckus in this state, and there are probably a lot of probate judges out there even today wondering, what's next for me, and I assume your office might even be hearing from some of them.
Well, I'm sure we are hearing from some of them, but again, the Alabama Supreme Court has this case, and they have injunctions out there, so it's up to them to now address that, and something I can't sit on. I wish I could, but I can't because of statements I've made and because of orders I've issued, but I'm sure they will address it.
The dissent among the U.S. Supreme Court justices was loud and interesting today.
It was very vigorous. Actually, it should have been very vigorous. Justice Roberts particularly was very vehement that this court upon which he sits had violated basically every rule of law. This is not the Constitution. He said there's going to be a lot of people celebrating this opinion, a lot of people bemoaning this opinion, a lot of people that will have parties and say that the court has done the right thing, but it won't be under the Constitution, he said. It will be under the feelings of justices who have ruled and found a fundamental right to marriage which doesn't exist in our history. And that's very important. In the case of Bowers versus Hardwick, which was cited by some of the justices, the Supreme Court of the United States had occasion to consider the right to sodomy. And they considered whether or not it was a fundamental right, and they found it was not a fundamental right. And they said in that case that when the Supreme Court is most vulnerable and comes nearest to illegitimacy, when it deals with judge-made constitutional law which have little or no cognizable roots in the language or design of the Constitution. They said that, and I'll quote here, there should be, therefore, great resistance to expand the substantive rights under the 5th and 14th Amendment, particularly if it requires redefining a category of rights deemed fundamental. And they said if you do that, they said that you'd be ruling the country without constitutional authority, which I think is exactly what the United States Supreme Court is doing now.
The advocates of same-sex marriage have said basically that their argument here is equal protection under the law. How do you answer that?
Well, I think we have equal protection under the law, whether a law applies to everybody. This law that we have in Alabama did apply to everybody. It applied to everybody who was entitled to marry a person of the opposite sex. You can't quote that as saying that two persons have an equal protection to marry. When the law applies to everybody, it applies to them as well. So I don't believe that equal protection of the law had anything to do with this opinion. If it did, it was the court going off on a tangent.
What about also the argument was made when this case was being discussed before the Supreme Court about marriage being more about procreation?
I think one of the justices in dissent actually quoted that, said that's what it was about. It was about procreation. And of course the 5 justices that ruled on the majority didn't regard that, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. We've heard from a lot of corners today that have labeled this court a liberal activist court. I suppose that whatever side of the fence you sit on depends on how you feel about these Supreme Court justices now, but do you feel that we have an activist U.S. Supreme Court now?
Oh, I think we have a very liberal, very activist Supreme Court, just like the court in Dred Scott that went off and found that black people were property. That was not part of the Constitution. And likewise, there's no mention of marriage in our Constitution. Marriage has historically been outside of the Supreme Court. They have now found a fundamental right. Now, under their own definitions of fundamental right, it's a right that has been found in our history and tradition. There is no history or tradition of same-sex marriage in this country. And certainly they went off on finding a fundamental right that didn't exist. And I think that was heavily criticized by Justice Scalia, Justice Thomas, Justice Roberts, and Justice Alito. And I think their comments should be heard. Justice Scalia said that we've departed from the jurisprudence of John Marshall and Joseph Story, and now are ruling according to the fortunes of a fortune cookie. And that's the way he put it in his opinion. And basically, how else can you explain Justice Kennedy, who in 2003 said sodomy had no public rights, and then he's found one today.
Mr. Chief Justice, I know that you're probably not surprised to hear that a lot of your critics over the years in the debate over same-sex marriage have accused you personally of being hateful and bigoted and those sorts of things. How do you answer that?
I don't hate homosexual people. I don't hate people that choose a lifestyle that I don't agree with. What I do hate is changing the basic function and historic definition of marriage given to us by God and recognized by the people of this country since its existence. That's what I hate. I hate changing something that shouldn't be changed because there's no reason to change it. It's not a fundamental right to have same-sex marriage.
Your Christian belief, your faith,
Sure.
Does that also play into to this decision?
My belief in God not only plays into my opinions, it plays into the Constitution of the United States. Our rights come from God by the organic law of our country. How do we know that the United States Constitution is law? Well, we know it because it says in Article 6 it's the supreme law of the land. But we also know it because in the code, the United States Code, it said it's the organic law. Well, it also says that the Declaration of Independence is part of our organic law. And in that declaration, it defines who gives rights. And it's not government, and it's not 9 men and women on the Supreme Court. It's Almighty God. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. It's very interesting that they said, among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. There are other rights God-given. For example, that's recognized in the 9th Amendment of the United States Constitution. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Some of those rights are the fact that marriage came from God when He created man and woman to procreate. That's a fundamental right. It's recognized in our history and in our tradition. It's inalienable. What does that mean? That means it can't be taken by government. Exactly what the court did in this opinion is take that meaning away from the country and away from our Constitution.
When gay marriages were temporarily allowed in the state, probate judges, some of them at least, decided that they were going to just go out of the marriage business altogether. Might that be a practical mode going forward?
Well, I can't answer for the probate judges that decided that. I know that this contradicts our religious liberty, and as Justice Thomas said, this is going to have a serious impact on our religious liberty. And Justice Alito said that today's decision shows that decades of attempts to restrain this court's abuse of authority has failed, and that those who favor same-sex marriage are determined to stamp out every vestige of dissent. Now that's Justice Alito quoting this. He also said it be used to vilify Americans who are unwilling to assent to the new orthodoxy. And I think that's exactly what this opinion is going to do. It's going to be a serious impact on our religious liberty.
And of course, the Alabama legislature this year took somewhat of a preemptive strike by passing a law that said judges and ministers who disagreed with certain marriages didn't have to perform them, wouldn't be forced to perform them. Finally, do you think this is a sad day in our
think
history?
It's a very sad day for our country. I think it destroys the basic foundation of our country. In 1885, in U.S. Murphy versus Ramsey, United States Supreme Court, they said family sprung from the union for life of one man and one woman in the holiest state of matrimony, the sure foundation of all that is noble and worthy, and the best guarantee of that reverent morality which is the beneficent source of all progress in civilization. And I think they've basically done away with that precedent. They're now finding that marriage can be other than between a man and a woman. And I don't think there's any end to it.
Alabama Chief Justice Roy Moore, thank you as always for being on the program today.
Thank you, sir.
It's nice to see you as always.
My pleasure.
And Capital Journal, we'll be right back.
Stay in touch with Capital Journal online, on Facebook, and on Twitter. You can also contact us by email at ddaily@aptv.org or by mail.
Next up on the broadcast, the Dean of the Alabama House, Representative Alvin Holmes of Montgomery. Representative, welcome back to Capitol Journal.
Thank you very much.
Nice to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm going to begin with the Confederate flag. You have long been a champion of removing it from the Capitol grounds. You have a well-documented case that got it removed from flying atop the Capitol dome about 10 or 15 years ago, and this week the governor removed all flags from the Capitol grounds. And
I certainly want to commend Governor Bentley for such a courageous stand that he has taken. And I think what he did is good for the state of Alabama and good for the people in the state. And what it does is this: Alabama in the past across the nation has had a reputation of being like a backward state. And I think for the governor of the state of Alabama to take this position, it boosts Alabama out in front, and it helps with the economy. I had a member of the Chamber of Commerce to tell me that they had problems of recruiting industry in the state of Alabama because of the Confederate flag. And he said because, companies will say, I don't want to come down there in Alabama and say, y'all got all that controversy over that Confederate flag issue. And said, we don't want to get our company involved in that, so we go into another state. And so it's good for the state that the governor has taken this position. It's an economic position also. Help with recruiting and give the state of Alabama a good image. And I certainly commend Governor Bentley for such a courageous stand.
Representative Holmes, is it also bittersweet in the respect that it took a tragedy like that in Charleston, South Carolina to come to this point?
Well, yes, it's sort of a bittersweet taste in your mouth. You think about that. But I think if the situation had not happened in South Carolina, we still would have gotten the Confederate flag removed. And the reason I said that, because the governor and I think most members of the state legislature, both black and white, felt that it was time to put that issue behind us and move on.
You were prepared in the upcoming special legislative session to offer a resolution that all flags be removed from state grounds if this had not happened this week.
I was going to introduce a resolution on the first day of the first legislative session, which would have been the special session. Of course, the governor has not set the date for the special session. I was going to introduce a resolution that all Confederate flags be removed from the premises of the state capitol.
Now, I mentioned at the outset that this has been a crusade for you for a number of years. You helped lead the way in getting the Confederate flag removed from flying atop the Capitol dome back in the 90s. Tell us about your philosophy as you have waged this battle through all these years.
Well, my philosophy, there are a lot of people that put forth the argument, that this is a part of their heritage. And my answer to that, and it is, part of certain people, a heritage, but it's a part of their heritage that kept my foreparents in slavery. It's an ugly past. The Confederate flag, they say, well, it doesn't represent racism. Well, if it doesn't represent racism, why do you see the KKK every time they marching, they carrying the Confederate flag? Because they know it represents racism. Of course, nobody can say that the KKK is not a racist organization. So every time you see them marching, they carry the Confederate flag. And so in light of the fact, I didn't think that would be good for the Confederate flag to be on top of the state capitol, to be hanging around. They had so many Confederate flags out there. In the north part of the capitol, you couldn't walk out there for a Confederate flag.
There are two very divided camps over this issue, Representative Holmes. There are you and those who feel like you that removing the flags is long overdue. And then there's the other camp that says, it's just a banner and there's a much bigger problem than just flying this flag.
Well, then, if that's the case, the Nazi flag is just a banner. Suppose somebody get the Nazi flag and walk down Dexter Avenue with it. The symbol of the Nazi flag represented the killings of 6 million Jews in Germany and many other people, and the ugly things that Adolf Hitler did. So the Confederate flag represent for several hundred years holding our people in slavery, killing them, raping them, and doing many other ugly things to them.
What does it say to you, Representative, when you see someone flying the Confederate flag, whether it be on state property or whether it be a private individual?
Well, if they want to fly it on private property, we don't have anything to do with that. Somebody, have a home on Arrowhead, out in Normandale, they want to put a flag in their backyard, Confederate flag, that's fine. But it shouldn't be on public property. It shouldn't be, because the state capitol represent the state of Alabama and represent all of the people in the state. And when we have visitors come and visit the state of Alabama from all over the country, we shouldn't have no Confederate flags flying all around the state capitol. What's wrong with the United States flag and flag of the state of Alabama? I served in the United States military, and I served on the United States flag. I love the United States flag, and I love the flag of the state of Alabama, but not the Confederate flag. That's something in the past.
I asked that question in the context of what do you think it says when someone flies the Confederate flag? Are they sending a message?
That's right. They're sending a message that they are racist. They're sending a message that they are racist and that they hate black people, and they want to get things back like it used to be. There are people who want to get things back like it used to be. Back in the good old days, in the 40s and 50s and 60s, well, we're not going to ever go back to those days. Those people are daydreaming. They think that one day we might go back to the 40s or 50s, where black people had to say yes, sir, and no, sir, and yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, to little 14, 15-year-old white kids.
To put this in perspective for folks, Representative Holmes, this has been an issue for you since the first day you set foot in this State House. I believe one of the first things you did upon being elected to the legislature in the early 70s was call for the removal of the Confederate flag from state property.
That's right. The first day I was elected to the legislature, I introduced a resolution to have the Confederate flag removed from the top of the state capitol. I never will forget it. It was quiet in there that day, and Joe McCorkadale was the Speaker of the House. So when he called for the districts by numbers for introduction of bills and resolutions, and so he called my number, and I went to the mic, and I was my district, District 80 then, and he called for District 80, and I went to the mic, and I said, Mr. Speaker, I said, I have a resolution, and said the clerk will receive and read the resolution. House Joint Resolution 238, be it resolved that all Confederate flags be removed from the premises of the state capitol. And boy, I had never seen such an explosion. It was like somebody had thrown a bomb on the floor. People were jumping to the ceilings and hollering, no, 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 no. And I told them, I was still at the mic, I said, you can jump up and holler all you want, but it's a new day in the state of Alabama now. You got Alvin Holmes in the state legislature, and you got 13 other blacks. And so we're going to fight for our rights, and we're going to make sure that all people, regardless of race, color, or creed, be treated right and fair and equal in this state. And we're not going to get insulted by a Confederate flag.
The Dean of the Alabama House, Representative Alvin Holmes of Montgomery. Always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you for
inviting me.
You bet.
Yeah.
And Capitol Journal. We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the online video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. Alabama Public Television's Ready to Learn service is on the road every week, providing on-site workshops, resources, and books for child care professionals, teachers, and parents across the state. On the go, helping children grow. Alabama Public Television.
And that's Capital Journal for tonight. Coming up next Friday night, we'll be joined by Leslie Searcy with the Alabama Opportunity Scholarship Fund and Ryan Cantrell with the American Federation for Children, who discuss new stats on how many kids are being served by the Alabama Accountability Act. We'll also talk with Al Thompson, the Vice President of the new Alabama Community College System Board of Trustees, about his goals and aspirations. And we'll be joined by Barry Matson, the Deputy Director of the Alabama District Attorneys Association, who discusses a new effort to crack down on prescription drug abuse in the state. For all of us at Capital Journal, thanks so much for watching. I'm Don Daly. Good night.